So at the outset, the questions that we need to address are: what is the characteristic in a process that needs to be measured for the purpose of quality control, and how should we measure for the purpose of analysis? Once we know these two, then we can look at the process and find out how to control the process. What you see here are typical examples of what could be those characteristics in manufacturing and services. For instance, in manufacturing, one possibility could be the number of defects or certain specs, and then we need to check whether it conforms to the specs. Maybe it is about missing elements, which could be an element of defect which we want to control. Similarly, in the case of services, it could be our definition of defects and the number of defects in various business processes. Errors in process documents could be another, or certain conformance to waiting time or lead time. Just now we talked about customer checkout time of 90 plus or minus 20 seconds. So there could be several such examples, and we need to exercise a certain sense of judgment and discretion to identify those characteristics which are important, and therefore we need to closely monitor it and make sure things work. Just we will take an example. In a service system, the time taken to complete certain parts of the business process could be an important characteristic. For instance, the settlement of claims in an insurance firm could be a measure, or the loan approval in a financial institution, or a patient admission process in a hospital. Suppose the voice of the customer says the desirable parameters are 20 plus or minus 6 minutes. Now the question is, how are we going to measure it? So there are two ways that we can measure. Since the patient is alright with 20 plus 6 minutes, one possibility is to count the number of occasions patients were indeed admitted after 26 minutes, because it becomes a defect in the process. Suppose we made 100 observations and we found that there were 7 occasions. So this means this particular process, patient admission process, delivers a proportion of defects of 7%. So that is one way to measure. Another way to measure could be to actually make a detailed measurement of the admission times in all these 100 cases, which means you have a stop clock and then find out when the first patient was admitted. Perhaps it may be 24.95 minutes. Maybe the second patient was admitted in 21.87 minutes. The third one, let us say in about 25.45 minutes. The fourth one in about 19.75 minutes, and so on. So one can use this data now and do the analysis. So in the earlier case, what we have is a number called 7% defect, and in this case we actually have a set of numbers. So the patient admission has become a variable, patient admission time has become a variable, and we have got several numbers for that variable. That is the second method. So the first method is called attribute based. Why? Because we did a simple clustering of the characteristic into two categories, good or bad. Measurements are easy to make, quick and less expensive, but remember, it will reveal very little information about the process, because all that we knew was 7 patients were admitted beyond 26 minutes. We had no idea whether it took 40 minutes or 29 minutes, none of that we knew. Nevertheless, this is one method called attribute based, because we are using attributes called good and bad to assess quality. In the second method, it is called variable based, because we identified patient admission time as a variable and made a detailed observation of the characteristic. You know, in many situations in manufacturing, it could be length, it could be diameter, it could be weight, it could be time. So these are all called variable based measurements. Measurement will be expensive because it is more time consuming, more detailed, but it will provide us a wealth of information about the process. We would know clearly what is happening in terms of average, in terms of standard deviation, so many things we can talk about. So, this is called variable based method of measuring quality. So, we have so far identified some of the basic issues to be decided before we launch a SPC program. What to measure? Do we measure it as a variable or an attribute? All these we have discussed. Let us now proceed to find out how to use statistics to set up the process controls. In the next video, we shall discuss this aspect in some detail.